So I was born in England, in the UK, and I think and we lived there as a family until I was 7 years old. My grandfather was a dairy farmer, and so for those first 7 years we were hanging around a dairy farm. And that involved things like, putting out the hay and feeding the animals and things like that. And I think that was a really good foundational experience for me. I really appreciate farmers, is that connection to nature, the getting up in the morning, before dawn. And I think that's something that's really missing nowadays. So yeah, my mother, she was a trainee nurse. And my father, he was training as electrical engineer with the Air Force. Yeah, so I had a brother and a sister. We were quite close together. Yeah, and I think for maybe perhaps our early time there in England was not so easy for our parents, for my mother and father. So when the opportunity came up to move to Australia with a job with Qantas, the airline in Australia, he thought that was a good idea. And so on my 7th birthday, I have a vague feeling of this because we left my birthday cake behind, and I think I was pretty upset about that. That's my mum's report as well. On my 7th birthday, we set sail to Australia. And we shifted over there, and that was the beginning of a whole new world. And you can imagine, we went and lived in Sydney, right in the middle almost of Sydney, on the edge of the actual kind of centre by the airport. And we'd gone from a farming community to a busy city. We lived on a main road. There were shops, convenience stores and things right next door to us. It was quite a different lifestyle. So yeah, we lived there for a while, and 5 years, in fact, and that was, I think, the contrast to England to Australia at that time was so different that my parents thought, no, this is not working, and probably they made the best decision for me, and that was to move over to New Zealand, and so my teenage years were spent in New Zealand, and there was a lot of opportunity there for just being a teenager. I think my experience in Australia sort of started at the beginning of my interest in surfing. We lived not too far from the beach, and even at that time, back then, surfing was quite a thing in the culture of Australia. And I had my first experience there on a big polystyrene board, and I kind of got hooked on it. So I would have been 7, 8, 9, something like 9 years old when I had my first kind of surfing experience. Yeah, and then moving to New Zealand, as far as an interest goes, that kept going. Another interest I kind of started to express myself was just being out in nature. New Zealand is just a fantastic, a glorious place for being in nature, and the early experience in England, being on a farm, that sort of carried over. And we had in New Zealand, when we moved there, we had a 10-acre property where I could just wander around by myself, build tree huts, tree houses. We had a little river on the boundary of our place, and I could go down there and catch eels, and we had a little mountain range close by. So we had it was a very out in nature, and for a young guy it was a fantastic place to hang out. I remember standing on the gravel road outside in the mornings in the frost, waiting for the school bus to come by and things like that. It was a really good time. So the surfing continued, the interest. New Zealand's got a lot of really good beaches, and that's continued on throughout my life. It provides such a kind of a spiritual connection to nature, to the earth, sitting in the water, navigating waves, looking at the land, in Taiwan, looking at the mountains, and sitting there looking back at the mountains is absolutely beautiful. and the working with the land. I'm not really a gardener. I think about myself more as a landscape gardener, and I like shaping environments, and I have that's the project I have in New Zealand at the moment with Lloyd's Retreat is shaping an environment, developing it, putting in a driveway. You know, it's early days with that project. We'll see how we go. It's you know, creative process. And of course, that's all those things are connected to psychology, which is my major, you know, self-awareness, which is my major love. Another thing in New Zealand was, for myself when I was younger, was it was an opportunity to really do all sorts of things. You know, sort of there was a lot of freedom in New Zealand, and sort of when I was growing up, it was at the tail end of the kind of the new age. And one of the things that I discovered was the idea of a house truck. And this was something happening in America, and I got a book. In fact, the book's here somewhere, over here. I've still got it, which is you know, building the idea of living. Now it's kind of like become the tiny house movement. So back then, in the 80s, the tiny house movement was very much happening in New Zealand, and turning a bus into a house or turning a truck into a house was quite a thing, and so I loved the idea of having a house truck, and so I bought an old truck that was used to carry horses, and I built a house on the back of it in my mother's backyard, and the whole community thought this was a very interesting thing going on, and I remember them all driving by and looking at it. And yeah, once that was finished, we went off travelling around New Zealand and into the South Island in this house truck. And because I was a surfer and surfing, we could just park at the beach. And so I did just park at the beach. Lived for 3 months at one beach, and then moved on and did some work from the truck. So that was a very interesting experience as a young person, and it's interesting now to see this return to the tiny house movement, which is really what was happening back then. Yeah, I remember my first job in New Zealand after leaving college. My first job was painting cars, and that came about because my friends, the friend group I have, were all into cars. We were into cars. We were into driving them fast, smashing them up, just having fun with cars. And they were becoming mechanics, and I thought, no, there's no way. I looked underneath a car. When I went to a job for a mechanic, and I couldn't see anyone around to interview me, and I looked under the car, and there was the guy under the car and covered in oil and really messy, and I just thought, you know, that's not for me. And so then I went for a job as a car painter, and I thought, oh, well, I was quite creative. I was quite good at art in school, and so this would look like a pretty good option. So that was my first job, was car painting in New Zealand. But at the same time, you know, my home life, my spare time was all focusing on self-awareness. You know, so this was even at 15. I was doing meditation. I was fasting. I was doing sort of cognitive therapy on myself. All of these things I had become really interested in, and so that was always happening at the side. And one day I met a guy who introduced me or invited me to an introduction to a style of breathwork, and this was a pivotal point in my early life. And I went along to that, and I thought, wow, this sounds really interesting. But I went home, and I thought, well, I can do breathing like that, and I breathed away as they instructed, and it was such a powerful, in 10 minutes, it was such a powerful experience for me that I just thought, wow, I have really got to understand this. This has some sort of meaning for me. That was my experience of that, my first sort of breathwork approach. I'd been doing meditation, but meditation is a very passive process as far as breathing goes. But this was really something different, and I felt I needed to understand it. you know, people often do ask me, when did I become interested in psychology? Pretty early on, I was thinking about had a strong sort of sense of self-awareness and a sense of what is going on around me in the environment. I was kind of really interested in change. As you know, I was doing the meditation, I was doing affirmations, I powered into affirmations, I had books and books of writing, you know, I am a good person, I am a good person. You know, it's safe for me to relax, all sorts of things. And I was reading, you know, I remember reading As a Man Thinketh, and as well as a lot of other self-help type of stuff, you know, and I studied that book. You know, I still remember the opening poem. You know, mind is the master power that moulds and makes, and man is mind and evermore he takes. The tool of thought and shaping what he wills brings forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. I think that's correct. Yeah, and I would go and I would read that in the bathroom after dinner, because it was my turn to do the dishes after dinner, and I didn't like doing the dishes. And then I remember I was doing dishes and I would have my hands in the warm water, and I just thought to myself, doing dishes is something that I'm going to have to do for the rest of my life. It would make sense for me to be able to actually enjoy doing dishes. And at that moment I just thought, I'm going to enjoy doing dishes from now on. And I enjoy just feeling the water, standing there, you know, it's like the experience. I just sort of, you know, it was a very Zen thing. And I was still a teenager when I was doing these sorts of things. So I think that my interest in change and psychotherapy, psychology was pretty early on. Yeah, my work in psychotherapy counselling has spanned many years. You know, I started in the mid-80s in New Zealand doing counselling, and once I had learned some basics about breathwork, I was introducing that into my work, and that really, you know, fascinated me. Of course, it was the process that I was personally involved in. I was doing as much breathwork practice as I possibly could. It was you know, heavy duty, intense. I'm sure I did too much at times, but anyway, that's what it was. And anyway, so yeah, my psychotherapy counselling practice evolved, and I continually was asking the question with breathwork and with the rebirthing type of style that I was using and gradually changing out of and modifying, because I was asking the question, you know, how do we make this into a more of a clinic-friendly approach? That was my thing. You know, how do we make breathwork a better intervention for clinical practice? You know, and in those early days, it was a better intervention for my own clinical practice. I didn't think about other people's clinical practices so much. I was thinking about how can I use it? How can I use it in a timely manner where the sessions are sort of contained? You know, they don't spin out into hours of working with somebody. How can we get it so the client can really you know, have a better appreciation of it? But most importantly, perhaps, how can we get the result, the effects of it, its effectiveness, kind of, you know, reliably the same, and, you know, so that it was a really effective treatment. So that was a part of my that started early on in my counselling practice, counselling and psychotherapy practice, and just sort of kept on building, really. Let's look at how do we define guided respiration mindfulness therapy. What's different, what's unique about that? What does it look like? To give you an idea of what it looks like. So for a starter, the idea of breathing in GRMT is we are using breathing and awareness and not talking and thinking. That's a huge distinction. So it just takes it out of that camp of talking therapies. When we're out of that camp and we're going into something different, something that is focused more somatically and more on breathing. So that's a distinction there. So the actual guided respiration mindfulness therapy practice, the intervention, involves a 60-minute experiential process. And I say 60 minutes, that's more or less. It's not exact, because there is a sort of an experiential process that takes place, and if it's well facilitated, 60 minutes is about what you get to be able to do it and complete it in. And there is so in this 60-minute process, your client or the participant, it will be lying down on their back, hands at their sides, and in a relaxed state, and their breathing will be guided as the guided respiration. So 60-minute process, and it has GRMT has three core components, and that is the respiratory regulation is the first one. There is a specific breathing pattern. It has, and then the second one is somatically focused mindfulness, and that's a really important distinction. It's not just mindfulness; it's a somatically focused mindfulness, and and that involves observing in GRMT, observing the strongest sensation in your body at any given moment. Okay? And the third component, or the third core component, is relaxation. And that means letting go of any tension that you notice, being in a vulnerable state, and not fighting anything, just relaxing. That's an important part of the process. In fact, these three core components are sort of getting down as a transformational breathwork approach. These are what I'm kind of thinking of as the fundamental components that are needed to cause transformation to take place. So that's what those things are involved in the breathing intervention in guided respiration mindfulness therapy. So the question then, what makes this unique? What makes GRMT unique? And I think a big part of that is it's got a different way of bringing about change, a different way of healing. It's a transformational approach, and it uses this somatic focus, and that's a big distinction from other types of approaches, say for anxiety and depression, which GRMT is demonstrated that it's a pretty good intervention for. It's bypassing our defenses, our mental defenses, and it is allowing us to make contact with the feelings and sensations in our body that we have pushed out of awareness. And it opens up that unconscious space which we don't normally get to access in normal everyday life. So it's a different pathway to change. We're not trying to work things out mentally. We're not trying to find meaning in things. We're even not trying to just sort of observe our feelings and describe them. We are actually putting all that aside, and we are just going into our body and the somatic experiences we have in there, and we're observing that. And the breathing is used to, what I call, activate those feelings and warded off experiences by increasing the energy level or the flow of energy through our body. And this makes it a very potent and effective intervention. So it's a transformational approach. It bypasses the normal defensive maneuvers, mental operations that we might do to avoid feelings that are uncomfortable, and it puts us in direct contact with that. And that really is the secret to transformation, is being able to make contact with the warded off feelings, the suppressed, avoided feelings, the feelings that we run away from, the feelings that we habitually try and keep out of awareness. And that is an important part of what GRMT is doing, is putting us in contact with that. And then the other important part of what GRMT is doing is allowing us to integrate those feelings. So by being with them, fully contacting them, not running away from them, and using the mindfulness, focusing on where is the sensation, not the feeling. We're not focusing in on feelings like sadness or anger or anything like that, or frustration even. We're focusing on the physical manifestation that in sensations. And so the mind is removed completely. There's no meaning making going on. We don't have to even think about it. In fact, the mind becomes really quite empty in this process. But change takes place very fast as we enter into these sensations, just be with them, accept them, and we move on. And a new feeling, a new sensation emerges, and we do the same process with that. So it's a very fast and transformational approach using these three core components of respiratory regulation, somatically focused mindfulness and relaxation. It's about just making contact with our real feelings and doing that by bypassing our normal everyday defenses. And part of the theory involved in that is that breathing, I said that it uses a specific breathing style or pattern, and the focus of that breathing is on developing an uninhibited breathing style. I say uninhibited, so there's no control in the breathing, there's no defensiveness in our breathing. We're working to remove inhibitions and straining in breathing with the theory that breathing inhibition develops to control or to keep suppressed uncomfortable sensations and feelings. And this process is going on right from day one, right from birth, is that breathing gets employed as a way of keeping uncomfortable sensations suppressed out of awareness. So the theory goes in GRMT, and this is how it works out, is that if we can release the inhibitions in breathing, then a free flow of energy, of sensations will move through our body, and those old blocked off experiences can be resolved. They can just flow through to their natural completion. And the mindfulness and relaxation is really important in that process of integration. So we can just step back from that, we can just look and say, okay, here we have breathing, this regulation of breathing that is aimed at developing an uninhibited breathing style that no longer blocks effects from emerging. We then have somatically focused mindfulness and relaxation, which is a non-defensive stance, and we are just being with those experiences and just accepting them. And so we have the activation on one side, and then we have the integration. I think that's probably, you can understand that. The activation of old, warded off, suppressed affect, and its integration into the daily flow of consciousness. So that's pretty much how GRMT brings about change. And so in that process then what we are talking about is not just the process of, say, reducing stress, reducing symptoms of depression, of anxiety. That process there is more, yes, it does those things, but it does those things because it is targeting underlying conflicts, underlying unconscious conflicts. So we are talking here about developmental derailments, early life experiences where we were frustrated and we haven't moved beyond that experience of having our needs frustrated. And we are still searching for our needs in an infant way in our adult life, things like that. So the characterological transformation GRMT encourages is because it is able to go back into that early life experience. It's not like a regression back into reliving it as such. It's just connecting with the feelings that were blocked off at that time, which makes it a very powerful intervention, transformational in fact, and you feel it right from the very beginning. A first session, while a first session, lying down, breathing, using those three components, being guided in that, you feel it. You feel the power of it. You feel its tendency to go quite deep into your experience, and that accelerates and deepens with each session. So, in my clinical practice, I would recommend people do one session, see what they think of it. It's not for everybody. Do 3 sessions if you like it and see what's changing and how it's going. And if they want the full kind of transformational effect where you actually re-pattern your breathing to be a natural, spontaneous, uninhibited breathing style, mostly, do 10 sessions. So from a clinical point of view, it's a very potent intervention, and it's a really good one to be able to offer clients. I invite you to read the research articles that have been published, peer-reviewed published articles, because they are interesting and they're not too difficult to read, even if you're not a scientist practitioner. So as a clinical intervention, especially you can say for anxiety, depression and stress, it's a very good way to work, especially if you are interested in, for anybody interested in the somatically orientated approach. And of course now this is becoming a popular way to think about things and to do therapy. Now we've got all these psychotropic drug research endeavours happening around the world. I'm involved with one of those, and there is a kind of an emerging interest and opening up of these kind of interventions, whether it's through breathing or psychotropic medications that induce an altered state, open up your awareness to your core experience of being alive. This is a kind of a new area. So as far as a clinical intervention, if you're interested, anybody interested, I think it is pretty good and it gets results. Interesting, a little while ago I was doing a little training, an introduction for psychologists for GRMT, and it was very interesting that one of the psychologists there said that, who had been working for 30 years, I think she said, she was feeling that she was really questioning, that the whole approach of psychology and the cognitive behavioural kind of dominant approach, and she said, she really doesn't feel that she's being able to get the results she wants for her clients, and that something like this, which bypasses people's defences and really just puts them in touch with themselves, their core experience, their real experience, could make a lot of difference for her practice. So yeah, just interesting. It's a very powerful intervention and it's well worth exploring, and training is available. So yeah. So the last thing I just want to talk about is the guided part of GRMT, guided respiration mindfulness therapy. That's a hugely important part of the whole process. So why guided? Well, this is a approximately 1 hour process where we are teaching how to develop an uninhibited breathing style, breathing pattern. And in the process of doing that, we're lifting the energy level in the body, and we are opening up that internal space by going around defensive strategies to make contact directly with pushed away, warded off somatic experience. And so that is not something that we are going to want to do sort of voluntarily, if you like. And that process needs to have a facilitator to guide it, a therapist there to guide it. It's not going to happen without that. As sensations and feelings emerge in the body, we have a tendency to run away from them. This is what it's trying to, GRMT is countering, is that running away tendency. So as a feeling of, say, of loss emerges, and the sensation in the body, we have the tinglings and things that go with that. We need the guidance, encouragement just to stay with that and focus in on those strongest sensations. So it's very important to have that guidance. The process induces an altered state. It is an altered state of consciousness that you enter into. It's an integrative altered state of consciousness. And you need to have a facilitator who is really comfortable and familiar with guiding you through that process. GRMT is non-cathartic, and so that means that if you have some experience of emotion, the idea is you feel it, but you don't express it in terms of crying you know, you can have a little bit of a sob, but it's back to the breathing. It keeps that process of engagement and watching, mindfully observing going. So there's no acting out in GRMT. There's no movement, there's no physical movement. If your body is moving around, the facilitator is going to encourage you to stay still. So this process of guiding is very important. It creates a safe place. The therapeutic relationship is really important in GRMT. The client has to have a trust that they can lie there with their eyes closed and breathing and feeling their inner experience. Yeah, so it's an important part of the process. Guided respiration mindfulness therapy. Yeah, so I think that's probably quite a good initial summary of what it's about. Of course, there's a lot more I could be saying, but I think, you know, that'll give you an idea. And it's a powerful intervention. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk that passed away not that long ago, he talks about breathing, mindfulness of breathing a lot. And this is sort of adding an extra dimension to that. No, he talks about learning through mindfulness of breathing to be able to enjoy every breath be pleasurable, you know, and that's kind of one of the results of GRMT, is having this free breathing style that is just spontaneous, every breath feeling pleasurable and not a strain, not difficult. So yeah, it's really got a kind of a link into that whole Buddhist idea of emptiness as well, because after you've been breathing for an hour and just focusing on breathing and your sensations and letting go of thoughts, that's where you kind of end up in this sense of just being, just emptiness. So it's a pretty powerful intervention. Yeah. One of the things in my life which I didn't mention before was over the past 6 or so years I've been living in Taiwan. And that has been a very interesting, challenging, but engaging process that I've really enjoyed. One of the things that, you know, with my surfing is that I've gotten to explore the east coast of Taiwan. And one of my favorite places is Dong He down in Taidong County. Fantastic place to explore for surfing. Just keep it a secret, okay? So yeah, it's a great place, and there's other places around Taiwan too. And to make that possible, going down for trips surfing, I have a Volkswagen T4 van, which is all set up nicely for camping. So yeah, so that's been a great experience here. So that's all been really nice experiences in Taiwan, and I can recommend people, you know, visiting Taiwan. The food's great, all sorts of different types of food. Yeah, and we have training available here now in Taiwan, which is good. It's a growing thing. Okay, well, thanks for listening to me on this. I hope you've enjoyed the little video.